of common sense America with Eden Cornell. Yeah.
And good morning, my beautiful America. It's Wednesday. It's January the 4th. I tell you what, it's almost going to be 75 degrees here in Eastern North Carolina. So I just wanted to welcome each and every one of you. We have a jam-packed show this Wednesday. If you have not been watching the news, well, I tell you what, there's a lot going on Capitol Hill. Some things unexpected and perhaps not, with the ongoing voting of Kevin McCarthy being the next Speaker of the House. That is the question, and that is what we will be talking about in the second half of this hour with Gabriella Hoffman, who is a Young Voices contributor and regional leader. She will be joining us at about 9:33 this morning. And also this morning, we're going to kick off with a pre-record that I did with Salih Hudayar. He is the Prime Minister of East Turkistan in Exile. You will recognize him as we talk about human genocide, as we talk about the sex trafficking, human trafficking, the concentration camps, what is happening overseas, and the new commission, select commission of China that will be happening in this new 118th Congress. So we have a lot to talk about here this morning. I am so glad you joined me. This is Eden Hill. This is Common Sense America. You are joining this podcast live here on all social channels, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We will be posting here on Rumble as well, on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm so glad to have you here this morning on this Wednesday morning. I just wanted to bring a note of encouragement. As I've been watching the House proceedings last night, I am a first-class nerd. I have been doing it since I was in high school, watching the C-SPAN channel with the House proceedings and what is happening in our nation's capital that will, in effect, actually happen and affect you in your nation's backyard. You know, I can't help but think, I was just critically thinking this morning and reviewing everything that I saw last night and hearing this morning. And I just want to do a side note before I say the statement, and then we'll head over to my pre-record with Salih. If you have a chance, go to 990 AM, Philadelphia's Morning Drive with Chris DeGaulle. He did a phenomenal interview this morning with Scott Perry, who is a congressman from Pennsylvania, I believe the 10th district. It is a wealth of information in regards to the background of what is happening with the speakership and the constant voting and the changes that are happening in and around Capitol Hill. He describes what the actions that took place yesterday on the Hill and what will be happening today. You do not want to miss that. It was live this morning, but if you go to his podcast, 990 AM, Chris DeGaulle, I highly recommend you go listen to that. But my note for today in my quick monologue before we head over to a very important interview that's more focused on international waters, and that is, do we lower our standards for unification? You know, I've been convicted. I don't want to lower my standards for anything or any group or anybody. For such a time as this, we've been called to be servants, to be public servants, to serve our community, to serve our nation's backyard, to serve. God has called us to serve. So do we lower our standards for unification? That's a question I'm asking each and every one of you. And we will be discussing that in the latter half of the show with Gabriella Hoffman. But first, I'm going to bring over our pre-record with Salih Hudayar. Sit back, take some notes. We have a lot that's facing our international waters, especially as it pertains to human trafficking and the genocide. Good morning. Welcome back. This is Common Sense America. I'm Eden Hill. And I tell you what, we are in this beautiful new year, starting new traditions, and we have a lot to talk about as this new 118th Congress starts today. We are looking to this new Republican Congress to battle some big international waters that we are going to be talking about here with a returning guest who I know you all appreciate and love hearing from, Salih Hudayar. He is the Prime Minister of East Turkistan Exile government. You can follow him on Twitter. You can follow him on LinkedIn. You can follow him on all social media, and you will be educated on what is happening with this ongoing genocide, with what is happening to our female population, what is happening to these amazing human beings, and how we can be protecting of them. Welcome, Salih. I'm so glad to have you back. I appreciate your work. I appreciate what your convictions, and I would love to hear what are your plans as we are headed into this whole new vision, this whole new Congress, what Republicans are doing. What can you share with us that you're looking towards this new Congress and hoping for them to assist with all the work that you did last year?
Thank you and Happy New Year. And with the new Congress coming in, with the new Republican Congress, at least in the House, we know that they are setting up a special select committee on China, which will essentially focus on the threat that China poses to the United States, the atrocities that China is committing, including its genocide in East Turkestan, and ways that the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government can work to counter the rising threat of China and its Communist Party. So one thing that we have been pushing for years now is to obtain East Turkestan's status, to have the U.S. Congress recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country, like we do in the case of Tibet. East Turkestan, like Tibet, was an independent nation prior to 1949. In fact, December 22nd, 1949 marked the 73rd anniversary of China's overthrow and formal occupation of the East Turkestan. And so we are trying to get this similar recognition. And additionally, we're trying to call on the U.S. Congress to also update pre-existing Uyghur Policy Act and perhaps pass a or perhaps pass an East Turkestan Policy Act, which one not only reiterates that East Turkestan is an occupied country, but also offers the same level of attention and support to East Turkestan in the same way that we have done so with Tibet.
So let me ask you this: as you are looking to the Select Committee on China, what are you hoping to specifically gain? What is your key points to our audience? So as you were talking to those who are retirees, those who are veterans, those who are active duty military, those who are working moms, working dads, working class families, who all sit down at their kitchen table and say, okay, you know what, I may not go to ABC News in the evening, I may not go to NBC News, but I go to Common Sense America because Eden focuses on common sense issues. Talk to us about those key points where we can help American families understand what are you looking to gain from the Select Committee on China, where it will then protect the United States and protect the genocide and protect those who are continuing to be affected literally, physically from everything that's happening.
Well, as I stated earlier, getting recognition of East Turkestan's status as an occupied country underlines the fact that China's reason for the genocide in East Turkestan, as it made it very clear in documents, in official Chinese media, and Chinese national defense strategy, is to prevent the independence of East Turkestan.
Right.
And it's essentially to colonize East Turkestan. So it's in the U.S. national interest to, even dating back to the Captive Nations Law, to keep the spirit of independence or the desire of independence by the captive nations like East Turkestan alive, and to push back against communist aggression, which is clearly happening in the case of East Turkestan. Another thing yeah, we're hoping that the select committee does is, investigate, and find ways to prosecute Chinese operatives,
Mhm.
and push back against Chinese intelligent operations, which have essentially, infiltrated all levels of the United States,
Mhm.
including government, Congress,
Mhm.
businesses, to even universities and
Yes.
academic, uh,
Yes.
to even organizations, diaspora organizations, in the case of Uyghurs as well. We need to push back against Chinese intelligence operations because it's a security threat, at all levels, and we're hoping that this will lead to more and more Chinese agents and uh, spies being uncovered,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
being executed, and hopefully the U.S. will uh, be able to get a better picture of what
Mhm.
China's aiming for. Um, on top of that, we want the select committee on China to also, press the executive branch of the government, including the
Mhm.
State Department, the White House, to take on, to take more meaningful actions to
Mhm.
end the ongoing genocide in East Turkestan,
Mhm.
now going into its ninth year. Uh,
Mhm.
China started the genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in May 2014.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
still continuing.
So I have a couple thoughts. First, let's go to the executive office of the president and let's think about, will they actually take action to protect the Uyghurs, to protect those who are being affected by genocide? And you talk about also the select committee on China from the new Republican Congress, where we are going to uncover and bring a lot of darkness to light, and the Chinese oppression and what they are trying to do to take out America, which is the superpower. Let's just call it as we see it. But my huge concern in layman's terms is this. I sit here and look at the new Republican Congress, and I sit here and look at a sitting president who I don't necessarily have any respect for because of what his family is known for in the national media, and that is hurting the lives of young girls, hurting those. And so my concern is, where's that money trail? And I want to really be at the forefront of making sure that those who are elected office will be held accountable and the president will be held accountable. But my bigger concern is this: for us to protect, and I want to go into the forced marriage of these women and the state policies of this inter-ethnic marriages in East Turkestan. I want to talk about that. My bigger concern is, are they going to be just passing the papers around, shifting the papers, checking the boxes? And I want, from the human interest standpoint of this show, I want to be able to say, you know what, when we get you back here in February and in March, seeing the movement, knowing that there's actually going to be some work done. Because what hurts me more than anything is the human piece to this. And that is knowing the human trafficking piece is international, billion-dollar industry. And what is essentially happening in East Turkestan, I have to sit here and say, is America on the brink of something like this because of the international human trafficking, international slavery, and international sex slavery? And knowing that there are people at the highest levels of our American government who are behind it and not doing anything to protect it. So, what I am saying on this podcast, and as we air this and we talk about some of these hard issues, let's talk about the forced marriages. Let's talk about the human aspect of these women being forced into marriage, and is essentially what you said is rape. Break that down for me.
So, I mean, the issue of forced marriages in East Turkestan, and the essentially sexual slavery of our women and our people, is actually quite a little bit different than the other issues going on internationally, in the sense that this is a systematic, deliberate campaign. It's
Mhm.
state policy. It's
Mhm.
being enforced by the Chinese state,
Okay.
promoted by the Chinese state,
Mhm.
and this is part of China's efforts to systematically eradicate East Turkistanis, and eradicate Uyghurs and other Turkic people, and breed them out to where they are replaced by Chinese people.
Mhm.
And this is not something necessarily new. It's been going on for quite a while,
Mhm.
but exacerbated, especially with the formal launching of the genocide in
Mhm.
2014.
Mhm.
Over, tens of thousands of women in East Turkestan, estimates of 30 to 40,000, probably even more than that, have been coerced to marry Chinese men, um, in an effort to breed them out. And
Right.
the benefits that the Chinese government, the way that they promote this is they promote, ads, trying to lure Chinese men, colonists, to
Mhm.
colonize Turkestan. So they say, hey, looking for young men who are able to, you know, settle East Turkestan.
Mhm.
We'll give you a high paying job. We'll give you, XYZ amount of cash. You'll get free land, free housing. And on top of that, you will get a beautiful local, woman,
Right.
who knows how to speak Chinese and who's very obedient. And this is the way that they promote it across, China. And the thing here is, especially in China, where there are not enough women for the Chinese men, so women are, there's always this stiff competition,
Sure.
trying to get women, and
Mhm.
whereas Chinese government's like, hell no, if you move and colonize East Turkestan to settle,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
get all these benefits, including a woman. And when it comes to the Uyghur women, for us, one, it's against our culture to
Right. Right.
marry out of our culture. One,
Right.
it's against our religion to marry someone who's not of our religion.
Right.
And the way the Chinese government coerces Uyghur women is, if you don't marry this Chinese man, your whole family is going to be sent to a concentration camp. So as a woman, you have this, you're put in a position where you're like, either I marry this man,
Right.
save my family from being thrown into a concentration camp,
Right.
or I reject this man and I watch my family being sent to a concentration camp, and yourself even subsequently being arrested for, quote, promoting, uh, you know, uh, racism, uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
tensions, etc. All these, excuses that the Chinese government comes up with.
Yeah, can I ask you something really quickly? How many concentration camps are that you know of are around that area? And because it seems like every time we talk, it just seems like there's more and more concentration camps first. That's my first question, and then I'll go to my next question.
So, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, along with others, they've done a lot of investigation looking into this and looking into the Chinese government's own procurement data. They established that there's at least 1,400 concentration camps across East Turkestan, which is a lot. A
That
lot.
is.
I mean, even one is more than enough, but 1,400 is a lot. And so, back to the forced marriages.
Sure.
So the women have no choice, and they're not just doing it one individual woman at once. No, in fact, they're doing it in large groups, where 100 Uyghur women are being married off to Chinese men. And not only that, the Uyghur women are being dressed up in traditional Chinese clothing from, like, the Han Tang Dynasty era.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
the Chinese people in China themselves don't even wear. forcing Uyghur women to wear this to symbolize this sexual slavery and dominance of the Chinese race over East Turkestan. And this is continuing. It's progressively getting worse day by day. On top of that, the Chinese government, it's has numerous policies where it Uyghur women from the ages of 16 to 25 that are unmarried are coerced, again under the lure of of promoting jobs and
Oh
giving
my gosh. Oh my
uh,
gosh.
employment. They're coerced and forced to be transferred into Chinese provinces to work in factories, and then from there some are even sold into the sexual slavery industry in
Yes.
China.
Yes, I was going to say that. Let me ask you something. You went back to the Uyghur women having to be obedient. And I sat there and I chuckled under my breath, not out of disrespect for them, but I sit here and I am an independent, resilient woman. I got married later in life. And if it wasn't for my faith and my Hungarian genetics, I am so resilient. And for me to be told to obey somebody, oh no. The only person I obey is my Heavenly Father and my husband since we got married. And that was out of choice, not out of duty. And so when I heard you say that, let me ask you this. Do you have Uyghur women going undercover looking as a man so they are not picked up? Do you have people that you are working with that I won't bring up I won't bring up any agencies, but do you have people that are offering to go in undercover to get these Uyghur women out and save them from this happening? I'm going deep here for a second because so many things of what you say that the CCP is doing here, and the rule, this authoritarian rule that this communist rule that they have, it really inflares in me fear, anger, and resilience, because a lot of those things, the template of the aggression piece, I'm concerned of because I see that here in America. It's happening a little bit after a little bit. America's, our federal government, who we should not be depending on, first and foremost. Oh, we'll give you this money for COVID. We'll give you this money for COVID. We'll give you this. We'll give you this. But you know what? There's always something in return that we have to give back. It's a control mechanism. And that's what's very scary to me. So let me ask you that. I make the comment of resilient women, and I make the comment of that control piece that's dipping its hand as we see it in an American democracy and with a constitution of we the people. What is being done? Do you see Uyghur women going undercover? Do you see people who are in private entities not associated with the federal government wanting to go in and rescue these women? What can you speak to that?
Unfortunately, there's not much being done. That's the
Okay.
sad reality. In fact, the only thing that's being done, even at a minimal level, is just raising awareness of what's happening. And you don't see, mainstream media talking about this.
No, they're not going to.
You
No.
don't see, government officials, Western government officials, talking about this issue, sadly. And so it's still most of the world is still unaware that it's happening. That's the biggest issue. As far as inside East Turkestan, I mean, Uyghur women, there have been, many cases where many Uyghur women committed suicide, to prevent themselves from being married off. In other cases, there have been a few instances where Uyghur women have, uh, engaged in violence against their, sexual, their against their rapists,
Right.
uh,
Right.
on the wedding night. But beyond that, there has not been much, and these are just few instances. Most of them, again, because of the fear of their family being taken into the camps, or the fear that they will be, thrown into prison. have no choice but to accept this sad, twisted fate.
Mm-hmm. Do you can you describe to me what happens to them when they're put in these concentration camps if they go against the law and they don't commit suicide?
Yeah, and this is according to the testimonies of Uyghur women who were previously in the concentration camps. Some of them have now been able to, they were able to seek refuge in the United States, some in Europe, and in these camps, what they are subject to is essentially mass rape as well, gang rape by numerous Chinese security forces, and the Chinese security forces even pay, earn money, make money by selling these women to be raped by Chinese men from the outside who will pay money to, have sex with, to rape these women that are detained.
So basically, they're becoming a part of a human trafficking machine.
Precisely, exactly. And this is according to, women who were witnessed this, who were subject to these rapes, and according to Chinese police officers who later testified about this, what they saw in these camps. And this is part of this. On top of that, women are being, constantly tortured. In these camps, they're being, forcefully, indoctrinated. They're being given medication, unknown,
Are they being drugged? Are they being drugged?
Yeah, absolutely. They're being drugged to where they forget who they are. It's a very sad state, and some of them, disappear, like to where they're never heard of again, and we suspect that's because their organs are being harvested. Given the fact that the Chinese government, collected their DNA samples, voice prints, and retina scans, and that there are, crematories nearby in some of these concentration camps, and in the airports near some of these concentration camps, there are special lanes for organ transplants only.
I mean, you could hear a pin drop after you just talked about the that aspect. One thing that keeps coming to mind as we are putting this out there for the truth. The show is all about truth. It's not about lamestream media, and it's not about promoting members of Congress or promoting a president, a United States president, especially since I'm not sure who's our current president. But one thing that mirrors what you just described of this human trafficking machine and the torture of what is happening to these women, I will tell you, what really scares me is that we as Americans, this also is happening here from the standpoint of the human trafficking machines. It is $1 billion industry, and it's happening right in our backyard. And what is fearful to me is this. You are mentioning to me that nothing is being done, that they're continuing to, take these women, rape them, destroy them physically, and raising the flag and raising the awareness on it as we're doing here is exactly what I have been doing here in the United States with all the children and women who've been going through the human trafficking piece as well. And on that note, I will be adding to the show the full account of that interview with Salih Hudayar. It is an intense interview talking about human trafficking. It is an intense interview talking about what is happening in our international waters. But as we transition, as you see on the screen, I have brought over to the show Gabriella Hoffman. You all are very familiar with Gabby. She is with Young Voices, and we're going to be talking Ron DeSantis again, was inaugurated yesterday as Florida's governor. We're going to be talking about what happened yesterday and the new 118th Congress and the speakership and what is coming down the pike. And we're going to be talking with Gabby primarily about her Hill rumblings, what she's hearing, and all the Hill gossip and what we can expect and how it will affect our kitchen table. Gabby, welcome. So great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Happy New Year, Eden. Good to be back with you.
Happy New Year to you. Wow, what a kickoff to this new year, huh?
It is. I don't think I've ever seen a congressional session begin like this in my decade of following politics closely and being in somewhat close proximity to Washington. But yes, it's an interesting time here in the DC area, and there's no shortage of it for sure. And in addition to Ron DeSantis, there was actually Governor Kristi Noem's inauguration for her second term too. So there were several inaugurations yesterday.
Gotcha. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to just enlighten me for a hot second with DeSantis. A couple different news sites, New York Post and some others, were highlighting Ron DeSantis's top quotes of 2022, which are pretty hardcore, in addition to his inauguration speech yesterday. But I'm, as a Jackie Kennedy follower of fashion and integrity and character and class, his wife stunned the crowds yesterday with her absolutely gorgeous fashion attire. And, previously in the first inauguration, she looked just like Jackie Kennedy. And yesterday she did it once again with class and style. And from a standpoint, as we head into the new Congress, from a standpoint of that, seeing character, seeing integrity, seeing that perseverance and that conviction of beliefs, I really wish we could see more of that in this new Congress. And I love being able to look to something as the example of Florida, because we certainly aren't seeing it from whoever's the commander in chief right now. And we're certainly not seeing it from the lack of lowering standards for unification. And that was my question at the beginning of this show to this podcast audience. What do we have to do for unification? Are we lowering our standards? And what are your thoughts? If you want to give a breakdown to the kitchen table audience about really what happened with Kevin McCarthy yesterday, I was receiving messages this morning. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? And, Scott Perry, congressman from the 10th District of Pennsylvania, did a great interview this morning on 990 AM with Krista Gall. He broke it down. He talked about the behind the scenes of what was happening with McCarthy and the ongoing votes. And, I was in Washington in 1996 as a university student and an intern on Capitol Hill, and I have never seen this happen. And so it's interesting to see. And another topic to that, and we can talk about this. The Speaker of the House doesn't necessarily have to be a member of Congress either. So let's break down in layman's terms what happened yesterday for the kitchen table, and let's talk about what could happen this week with this new Congress.
This is, I think, a one in a century event. We haven't seen anything. The reports are saying this is the first time we've seen a vote like this deconstructed, or kind of an undecisive decision that has come about from a new Congress since 1923. It's interesting how things come in patterns. It's for some levity for the morning, but it's never a dull moment in Washington. And I think most people woke up thinking that, okay, new Congress comes in, there's going to be a check on the Biden administration. Yeah, we don't have a speaker yet. And thus far, the Democrats are all coming together. They've coalesced behind Hakeem Jeffries, who's going to be the House Minority Leader. Right. For my estimation, even if it takes, I don't know, however many vote counts to achieve as House Speaker, Democrats won't get it. There's no way, because they don't have the votes. And I don't see Republicans voting for Hakeem Jeffries under any circumstance. So it'll be a process that'll be hashed out, from my understanding. From what I've seen from the commentary class, like people I look up to, I've seen a mixed kind of reaction to what is happening. I want to separate it from my own personal opinions, because I take, I see both concerns, and I don't want to obviously, insert my opinion necessarily, but I think conservatives for the longest time, this is kind of a big picture type of thing. And I share the same concern as well. They see whenever Republicans gain control, or they have a slight majority, or there's a tied vote like there was in the Senate before this week, Republicans see many in their leadership kowtow to Democrat demands whenever there's a little instance of power, or they don't sufficiently stand up to, let's say, almost whole of the government Democratic rule, whether it's the White House, plus a combination of one chamber and something else.
Mhm.
And so we've seen this. We've seen fatigue develop and disillusionment. After the Tea Party wave, Republicans, they couldn't remove President Obama in terms of re-election prospects. He won re-election, even though there was sentiments. People were very upset with where the country was going. And he won a second term despite all the bad policies that he had. He was just a very popular figure, even with his flawed policies, and arguably very controversial and somewhat dangerous policies too there. But he was still a very personally popular figure among people, even if they didn't like his policies. And so the Republican opposition didn't work necessarily to get in. And we also had a weak candidate, obviously, in Mitt Romney. He was not the strongest candidate. And he didn't know how to appeal to a wide swath of people. Even within the conservative base, and he wasn't really doing well with women and independents either.
Right.
And then when we regained the House in 2014, you would think there would be more of a standstill to that agenda. There was some pushback, but it wasn't as, viable or as notable as it could have been. And they were still giving Obama appointments. They were voting for cabinet secretaries, not really acting as a resistance like what Democrats do for Republicans. And whenever we moved to, let's say, the Trump administration, Democrats were opposing almost all Trump administration appointees, with a few exceptions. Some of the moderates came around to voting for some of Trump's appointees in energy, environment, and some other cabinet positions. But almost towards the end of it, the Democrats were in lockstep opposing most, if not all, cabinet secretaries. Republicans, I understand the courtesy thing. You want to give it to people. And then you learn that these cabinet secretaries, a lot of Republicans gave support to Pete Buttigieg in the Senate confirmation, Jennifer Granholm, all these people. And then they come out against them, not having known that they were going to be voting and enacting policies in their respective cabinet positions, as we had all predicted and kind of foresaw. And so Republicans are a little too nice, and they don't know how to stand up for their values and represent people. Now we're seeing it manifested here. These 19, now 20 some odd different representatives, largely conservative members, have said to Kevin McCarthy, we've seen what you and your predecessors as Republicans have done before. You've promised wonderful things, yet you haven't delivered, and you kowtow to Democratic demands.
Exactly.
For big spending bills. And so I get the concerns there. I absolutely do. And believe me, I wish that they would follow that kind of more conservative tune. But now we're at a kind of a problem. Although I've heard different opinions. I don't know if Kevin McCarthy will be forced out of this vote necessarily, because he's been through the ringer three times now. This recording. And there's actually been more opposition building to his candidacy for speaker. It was initially 19. Now there's 20. I don't know if in today's votes that are going to commence around noon Eastern time, if there are going to be more supporters peeled off. Because it seems like these people, unless McCarthy meets their demands, they're not going to vote for him one way or another. And so Republicans are in a dire situation that if you don't have these 20 some odd members voting for you, Kevin McCarthy will never achieve the speaker's position whatsoever. Now there's going to be debate of, okay, everyone was almost coalescing. They put Jim Jordan's name in contention. He said he's for McCarthy. Unless something changes overnight, I don't see his position changing. He's kind of looking at the big picture thing. He thinks that he can force Kevin McCarthy. And I think Kevin McCarthy would do this better than John Boehner. John Boehner was a capitulator. He cried all the time. I think Kevin McCarthy understands. I want to be optimistic. I think he does understand the concerns that he wouldn't have gotten the speakership gavel potentially if it wasn't for conservatives entrusting him with fundraising, support, things of that sort. And he did want to reach out to them. You have to give him credit there. He was a workhorse in many respects. Is he perfect? No. Could there be someone more conservative? Absolutely. Would he be an improvement on Boehner? That's what I think would be the case, because they do see what's happening. And Kevin McCarthy was very critical of Senator Mitch McConnell supporting this omnibus monstrosity. So if there's any early indication, I don't think they're going to do exactly everything that some Senate Republicans have been doing. So I think we can give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because he has deviated from Senate Republicans who would go along with these so-called bipartisan deals, but they're not. They're not really bipartisan. They're just pork barrel spending, things of that sort. And so kind of how I talked about kind of the recent history of Republican kind of fatigue with conservative fatigue with Republican leadership. What are the dynamics now? And while I do appreciate them wanting to demand more of Kevin McCarthy, we don't know. We hear both sides of the story that the demands have been met. McCarthy has said he'll meet this. Then we hear the other side saying, no, they have been insufficiently met. We don't support this. Therefore, we're opposing him.
Mhm.
So they have to come to a consensus. I don't know if it's with Kevin McCarthy accepting more demands, or does it come in the form of Kevin McCarthy stepping aside and someone, I mean, Jim Jordan has been nominated.
Yeah,
So
yes.
He could technically say, maybe I am the consensus candidate, Kevin, if you entrust me to carry out your duty and this and, rallying votes, perhaps that would happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen. He doesn't seem like he's going to relent on the speakership vote.
No,
He has said
he doesn't.
different things. And so I think Republicans, I'm not sure what they're going to do to peel off votes. Maybe they're going to be caucusing with these 20 members. I wouldn't want to accuse them of being terroristic like some Republicans have. I think that's crazy what Representative Don Bacon said, that they're the equivalent of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. I think that's rhetoric is
extreme.
Dangerous.
You
don't want to do that if you want to get their vote and be in control of the House of Representatives,
Right,
which they should be. But I am a little frustrated that they are stalling the votes because on the one hand, the other side of the pendulum where my frustration comes in this respect is they can command their complaints and their concerns if they have the majority. I think now they have the ability to convince and to play a role with the gavel in Republicans' hands. And they can do this behind closed doors, because whenever Republicans air dirty laundry, this is like catnip for many in legacy media and Democrats. And they see Republicans, look, they're infighting. So whenever we hear some people in the conservative commentary out say, oh, no, this is just the liberal lies. It's like, no, we're actually giving them ammunition to say that, look, there's division, there's discord among Republicans and conservatives. And so some of their predictions, unfortunately, are right. And they want this to happen in many cases, to see division among Republicans, say that there are other extraneous factors contributing to this because it's Trump's party. They can't come together because they have misplaced priorities, things of that sort. And so on the other hand, I would like them to get their act together to reach a consensus, because the more they stall, the more they can't block legislation. They had promised on day one they would stop the funding for 87,000 IRS agents.
Right.
Where is that promise?
Right.
We don't see that. And so they can act as a rubber stamp rather, against Biden's agenda, because they control the purse of funding. They can easily do that and block legislation from the outset, and you won't be able to get, reconciliation with the Senate. It will ultimately not go to Biden's desk. And they should act as a chamber which restricts much of this really lofty, big government spending, big taxation proposals. And they can force Biden through negotiation tactics to support good bills. The only bipartisan stuff we want to see is the force of hand by Republicans, not bipartisan legislation that increases spending, forces more taxation, things of that sort. And so I'm in a quandary myself personally, because on the one hand, I do understand the principled notion. You want to force McCarthy to be conservative. On the other hand, if we don't control it, I don't know if Democrats swoop in with Hakeem Jeffries. I don't think there's ever been precedent for that, but that could open up an opportunity where they could somehow regain control. That's like a worst case scenario, even though I know the mechanics are not there, but they need to come together and reach a conclusion. And whether it's in the form of McCarthy or someone else, I'm not sure, but maybe Kevin McCarthy has to offer more concessions. That remains to be seen. We'll see how today's votes pan out, but it's definitely an intriguing kind of stalemate that we have. We haven't seen this, like I said, in 100 years from what observers have noted.
Yes.
And so I think you can hold both positions. You can be frustrated that we don't have formal control yet, because these congressional members are not sworn in yet. They're congressmen, congresswomen elect.
Exactly.
And so, and you want conservatives to force an agenda to block Biden initiatives. And we should. You can do that when you have control. And I think Kevin McCarthy now has more of the ear of these people. So I would hope that, both sides of the Republican spectrum come together and find reach a consensus, because I don't think the American people want this. And if you do this and delay blocking legislation, how are voters going to respond? Let's say statewide elections happening in different states. Here in Virginia, we have statewide elections for our state, or for our General Assembly. Kentucky has gubernatorial elections. Louisiana does. So are people going to be motivated if they're not actually actively blocking Democratic priorities? I don't know. So the public can respond. We'll see what polling says. If polling is taken on this very issue, if people support what they're doing, if they don't support what they're doing, it remains to be seen. But I have a lot of thoughts. Those are kind of my thoughts in a condensed format.
Yeah, I was sitting here watching it like a first class nerd yesterday. I used to watch the House floor when I was in high school. I couldn't wait to get to university and be that intern and go to the Hill and do all of those things. And the good Lord knows he placed me there for a long time. But with that said, I was sitting there watching it until evening last night. And, I was watching the demeanor, I was watching the actions, I was watching the lack of maturity amongst these soon to be elected members of Congress, and then those who have been there. And, my opening monologue yesterday morning was, come on, people, just pull up your pants and grow up. Set aside some of these issues that you're having, because really you're setting this precedent for what is to come for 2023. That doesn't give us any hope. Yeah, we shouldn't have hope in elected officials, but we the people placed you there to make mature decisions. Grow up, set aside some of your differences and grow up and actually do your work. And I don't see that. Happening. And as I continue to rant to you and to my audience, looking back on the years of the members I served as a public servant, looking around to the members I served, and I sit here and I'll just name a few. Louis Gohmert with Steve King and Michelle Bachmann and Kevin Brady, who is outgoing now. And I remember that time period. Yeah, it was more of the Tea Party time period, if you will. But I remember that time period. They were not afraid to stand up for what they believed in. And in many ways, let me just say this, and I was listening on the radio this morning. Marjorie Taylor Greene is, a lot of people were saying on the news this morning on the conservative talk radio, she looks out of sorts. Even her constituents are saying she looks out of sorts. And so the Marjorie Taylor Greene that we've seen over the years of, being outspoken, similar to like the Michelle Bachmanns and the Louis Gohmerts and the Steve Kings during that time period, and even the Rick Santorums that I used to work for, I sit there and say, what has happened to her specifically that she seems so out of sorts? And is it because she is being held to something that McCarthy is holding her to? And my mind is reeling all over the place with what is happening here. To bring it back to the full big picture, we, the American people, put these people in office. We entrusted them to be the servants of the people. We tell them what to do. We are their bosses. So my statement to each and every one of them is, okay, don't lower your standards, but act like mature adults, because I am not seeing that coming from any of them. I'm not seeing that. The only person that is really standing up for what I think is Jim Jordan. And Jim Jordan is from Ohio. Yes, he is on judiciary. And yes, he's looking to lead in many, many ways. But my concern is we need somebody who is humble, similar to Jim Jordan, who has a good head on his shoulders. And what I see from McCarthy is someone who is a Ivy League, and I don't know where he went to school, but his appearance and his demeanor is more of a cockiness that I don't like. We have enough of that in Congress as it is. And having served for so long and seeing this, it is infuriating to me that we have not grown up yet. And the Republicans, whether they are Republicans in name only or conservatives, are going to lead in this manner. Does that give us hope for 2024? I don't know. And then I sit here and look at Ron DeSantis and his swearing in yesterday and saying something is a lot more organized and more functional than what is happening on Capitol Hill.
You can argue that the governing styles of people outside Congress, so I think you can even apply it to multiple state governors. So I think this is kind of how the elections went. People starting in 2021 when my governor was elected.
Yeah, Youngkin. Mm-hmm.
And going into how well most of the Republican governors did last year. A lot of people were more confident in the gubernatorial election results and state legislature results. They weren't perfect. We could have made some more inroads in the Midwest. We didn't. We lost on opportunities in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, for instance, and we lost Pennsylvania a second time. And so those excluded, those were going to be hard to get anyway. But we maintained most governorships. They said very, very red states like Oklahoma were in play. And I didn't believe that for a second, even though there was some discord between Governor Kevin Stitt and some of the native tribes in Oklahoma. He still won by double-digit margins. Kristi Noem won decisively.
Right.
Governor Ron DeSantis had one of the biggest margins of people. And most of the Republican governors were reelected soundly, no problem, and largely kept their state majorities with respect to their legislatures intact as well. So people, and Governor Brian Kemp as well, won pretty decisively, almost by 10 points. And everyone in Georgia, with the exception of Herschel Walker, won pretty resoundingly. And so people see that you can get more done in your state legislature. Your governor's decisions and his actions are going to be more immediately felt by you, the citizen. And I think that's what most people see. We have to pay attention, obviously, to what happens in Congress because it's serious. It does affect us. But those decisions, according to a lot of people, don't affect us immediately. They take time. What I see, unfortunately, with some of the obstacles, or some of those who are kind of creating obstacles for, let's say, the majority and trying to put Kevin McCarthy's feet to the fire, I think some of it is personal. I don't know if it's necessarily political, that maybe they're just not happy. And a couple of those members, I don't want to name them individually. I think a lot of them are very online, and they think that if they're very online, they're going to please their base and get more accolades, social media followers, et cetera, et cetera. And you can't operate like that. That happened with Madison Cawthorn, who is now a one-term congressman. He was just a showboat. He didn't do anything. He got distracted. He had different sexual scandals levied at him. He was very deeply flawed because he was just a very online candidate. So I worry that some of these new members who were backed by Kevin McCarthy, who are very online, could fall into the same trap down the road. I don't want to, predict how someone's, let's say, tenure is going to be, but I worry that a couple of the newbies are just after attention. I don't know if they're going to seriously govern, if they're engaging in this from the outset. Like I said, some of the others who are protesting Kevin McCarthy currently, they do it out of serious concern. And I don't think they're doing it to be like, we want to be just rebellious. I think some of them, like, I like Byron Donalds. I think he's great. Yeah. And I know he wouldn't make a decision like that to originally support them, peel away support, if he was doing it just to be a showboat. I know he's very serious about enacting conservative policies. But some new ones, they strike me as a little bit concerning because they have a tendency to showboat. They're very loud. And then we don't know what they're going to be in person. Thus far. And so going back to DeSantis, yes, I actually had a few friends in attendance at his inauguration. And it looked like a really lovely time. I went to Tallahassee twice last year, unrelated to anything Ron DeSantis or whatnot. I just had 2 speeches at Florida State University. And it was a nice state capital, modest. State capitals, they can be either big cities or not big cities. And it's a modest state capital. There's some great food there. And it's unsurprising that he is getting conservative thought leaders, journalists, and others to be in attendance. I don't think it's necessarily for laying a groundwork for a 2024 bid, but he's smart. And I remember this early on when I got involved in politics, when Ted Cruz ran for office the first time. I wish more elected officials did this. They assembled like a cohort of like bloggers and journalists on the center right to get to know them, to give them access for stories, to have a telethon, whatever you, not a telethon, but like a virtual meeting early on the outset. So he's kind of borrowing that same tactic of currying favor. I wouldn't say currying favor, but currying access with people that he knows would honestly tell his agenda. It's not that he's commanding them, you need to tell my agenda as accurately as possible, but he's giving them access and trying to build trust because he knows these individuals, whether they're Fox News contributors or journalists or pastors or what have you, he knows that if he gets their support early on for current second term activities or future presidential runs, he knows that they have a big platform or big social media followings that they can communicate and say, see, I know Governor DeSantis formally, he invited me to inauguration. I've gotten to know him. We can trust him. He's a serious leader. He's won decisively. And so I think the governors, separate from elected officials in Congress, are a little more tactful and smarter. Than I think they have their act together. Are they perfect? No. They all have their flaws, but there is something differently. I think the Republican governors, maybe it's the foremost organization that helps cultivate, recruit, bring Republican governors to the forefront. They seem more organized. I've always seen this, and I think they have more priorities in line, and they understand the big picture thing. And those races are run very differently than federal races for Congress or Senate. They can be just as costly.
Yes.
But the candidates for governor maybe are less controversial. Perhaps they're more mature. They have life experience. A lot of them are former members of Congress. DeSantis was formerly in Congress.
Yes.
Governor
Yes, he
Kristi Noem was formerly in Congress.
Yep.
Brian Kemp weathered a lot of storms with Stacey Abrams encouraging the MLB All-Star Game to go. He won a lot of people points over for standing strong in that, even though the MLB All-Star Game was sent to Denver, which had far more restrictive voting laws in place. And so voters wanted to reward serious Republicans who weren't necessarily getting into these quabbles, but were still enacting agendas. They were still doing a lot of, Trump priorities, but they weren't Trump. They were their own individuals. They were their own man or woman.
Exactly.
And so that's why I think you see more stability with state legislatures and governors, largely because they're different people. They know how to be their own individuals. And a governor is kind of like, I wouldn't call it like a little president, but running a state is almost like overseeing your own country, kind of your own little country.
Yes.
And so it's a very different responsibility. You have to represent your whole state. You're not just representing, let's say, a metropolitan region or a rural region. You're representing your whole entire state. So it requires a different acumen and a seriousness with governing. And that's why I think voters, even center left moderates and independents, were rewarding Republican governors, Republican governors now. So Governor Youngkin won a lot of independent votes. He got even a portion of Democrat voters to support him because he appealed to them on education and low taxes and other things.
Yes,
Governor DeSantis, I think, appealed to maybe at least close to 10% of independents, or he won by 8 to 10% of independent voters over Charlie Crist. He won a lot of demographics that Republicans are always trying to capture. Very naturally, he didn't do anything special other than being himself and governing conservatively. And so people see that there's something going on with these Republican governors who are winning competitive races, either decisively or overwhelmingly. And they see that, okay, we can treat these Republicans, we'll vote for these Republicans, but they're seeing what's happening in Congress. And that is why we see this kind of mixed bag result in Congress, because I don't know why the Republicans weren't more in sync. And again, different races necessitate different demands. You can't necessarily implement what you would in a governor's race for a congressional race, but you could borrow some of the same elements.
Right.
And so I think there was a lack of, let's say, communication or strategy that you could have applied from governor's races to, let's say, federal races. Maybe they're not the same priorities. So it's just a lot to scratch your head over and to wonder. But it's no surprise, like I said, that you see a different level of seriousness and kind of more level-headedness among Republican governors, rather an absence of kind of discord or infighting. You see Republicans I haven't seen any. You see a little bit of, quagmires a little bit in Virginia. There's not really much of people fighting. It's only just one person, one kind of, how would you say, kind of fringe radio host who's not really conservative, trying to pit Virginia conservatives against Governor Youngkin and Winsome Sears, our lieutenant governor. And he doesn't really have that much clout. But apart from that, I think most elected officials in Virginia are in sync with Governor Youngkin. Youngkin wants to get their support. Same with DeSantis and his supermajorities in Florida. Same with Governor Noem and her legislature. And so even if they have slight differences, they still come together in the states. Are we going to see that in the Congress? I'm not sure. I mean, and the thing is with the Senate, it was extremely disappointing that a lot of outgoing members who either didn't run for re-election or they lost voted for these crazy spending bills. So I think 5 or 6 of these senators are not returning. There are more conservative members in their as their replacements.
Right.
And so maybe there will be more of a block happening, but the Senate doesn't give me much confidence, because if McConnell is going to be standing side by side with Biden touting the so-called infrastructure bill, I'm not hopeful about the Senate. So that's why the House has to be a stopgap to Biden's agenda, especially with wobbly Republicans, although there will be fewer in, I think, the Senate going forward who are going to be wobbly because they're largely out of office.
Right.
But we still have to worry about maybe 5, 6, maybe upwards of 10 Republicans who could be on board. Very attractive, nice sounding pork barrel spending, so-called infrastructure defense bills. But their feet can be also held to the fire. But I think a lot of people have lost trust in the likes of like Tom Cotton and some of the others who were voting in this omnibus bill. So you can't really say you're against the wokesters if you're supporting these gargantuan bills that enable. So people are going to be very skeptical. Does it mean you chase them out and you say you're done, you're a traitor? Maybe they can rehabilitate their image, of course, but you have to be more skeptical of some of these individuals if they made this, questionable vote. But yes, look to the states, I would say, in the immediate future until the House Republicans get their act together. And, what happens in your backyard? I know you guys have an election, what is it, 24 gubernatorial race coming up as well.
Yes.
So paying attention to your backyard, making sure the candidates you nominate have their act together and they're going to be a little measured and they can appeal to the independent votes, because independent votes are becoming a larger share. And we have talked about this often. Independents can vote for Republican policies, especially when it comes to freelancing, economics, school choice, things of that sort. So we can get the independents as long as we have people who willingly reach out to them. You don't have to trade your conservative credentials to win over their votes. You just have to be honest and say, I hear you, I see you. Our policies are going to help people like you as well. It's not just helping Republicans, it helps all Americans. And here's why you should trust us. And so it's a mixed bag right now, but I want to be encouraged. I'm encouraged on the governor's side a little bit. The House side leaves me pessimistic.
Let me just end it on this note. Republican governors make the best United States presidents, and I'll leave it at that. Gabriella Hoffman, who's the regional leader for Young Voices. You can follow her on Twitter. I have it running across the screen. And I would love to get you back to talk about the freelance industry, what's happening for 2023, talk about our military spouses and how so many of them are freelancers, and love to have you back to talk about that very soon.
Yeah, I think in a couple of weeks, there will be some things coming down the pipeline. So let's revisit in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Have a great week. Happy New Year. And I look forward to hearing any of your Hill insider views on Twitter. So everybody go to follow Gabriella on Twitter. Thanks, Gabriella. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Eden. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. For all those who are tuning in, this is Common Sense America. You are following us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on all the social channels here for this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in this Wednesday, January 4th. Make sure, if you haven't watched some of our most recent interviews and the full clip with Salih Hudayar, the Prime Minister of East Turkistan in exile, go to Rumble and also YouTube, and you will get to see the full clip as well. And we are just so grateful for each and every one of your support. Thank you to all across the Northeast, here in the South as well, for joining the show, for being a part of the show and being such a great support. Have a great day. Be strong, be courageous, persevere, fight the good fight. Do not give up. We have a lot to do. And also, you know what? Get on your knees and say some prayers for what is happening in our United States Capitol and in and around the world for the women who are being human trafficked as well. Something that we do not want to dismiss, something that needs to be talked about. Until then, I'll see you tomorrow. God bless you.